All right. Hi, guys. In the next session, we have a group of panelists with us to wrap up the morning discussion with an omnichannel marketing greatness. This session will be moderated by Jane Lattimore from Ipsos. In case you missed the introduction earlier, Jane is the Regional Service Line Leader for Market Strategy and Understanding of APAC at Ipsos. Our first guest of the panel is Meng, who is the Marketing Director of Abbott Nutrition Malaysia. She is the marketing professional with more than 18 years of experience in local and regional markets and a demonstrated record in planning and implementation of integrated plans that turned around businesses in different categories. Meng has managed across marketing functions of insight, brand, media, digital, CRM, and e-commerce. Our second guest is a multiple award-winning workaholic who is now the Group Chief Merchandise and Marketing Officer for Aeon. Ngai Yuen Lau is also a passionate activist who supported two causes. The 22-year-old Kaki Seni that champions the arts and its advocacy, as well as founding Women Girls in 2011, an NGO dedicated to remind women as role models to younger girls to achieve their potentials. Yuen also sits as an independent director contributing to two public listed companies, GDX and OCK. Our third guest of the panel is Deryk Yap, who is the country manager of Qoni. He has been in the travel industry for nearly 20 years. He started learning the trade and garnering exposure from a very young age by working in one of the leading travel agencies in Malaysia during semester breaks. He subsequently joined the travel industry as a full-time hotelier in a renowned local hotel where he quickly rose to the top of the sale charts. Deryk is now heading his own corporate incentive team and has successfully handled special interest groups of 20 to large, conference groups of 2,000 over the last 10 years. Our fourth guest of the panel is currently the CEO of Trapper, one of Malaysia's leading integrated marketing media agencies. Su Ann Lim was previously the MD and co-founder of Clear KL and the Chief Data and Strategy Officer of Dentsu Aegis Network Malaysia. She has a total of 19 years experience in designing growth strategy for businesses and brand transformation. Su Ann has published thought-leading articles in Campaign Asia, WARC, and The Economist, and last spoke in Big It 2021 and Intel's Technovate Regional Conference. We are also very honored to have Kony on board as a Tech Trooper sponsor. This is definitely one great panel discussion that you cannot miss. So if you have any questions for the panel, please don't be shy and post it in the chat box or in the comment section. All right, let us quickly check up on our panelists and we'll be right back with you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the great introduction. I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness, honestly. Some of your stories are amazing, and I'm really happy to have this conversation with you today. So thank you so much for joining us. We're here to talk about omnichannel marketing greatness. Woohoo! So we're going to talk about how we can make it a really good success, and we all know that it's been a very challenging 2 years. So I want to start with a question to everyone. One at a time, don't all speak at once, which will just be a chance to introduce yourself a little bit and to tell us how you have seen your business changed in the last couple of years as we've come through and out the other side, hopefully, of the pandemic. So we'll start with you.
Thank you. I'm Director of Marketing for one of the nutrition company in Malaysia. Well, it has been quite an exciting year especially for marketing in the last 2 years. As we all know, during the pandemic and after the pandemic, there is a lot of shift in terms of consumer behavior, whether if it's on the channel of where they shop or trends or consumptions of different media, which is what we will be talking about in omnichannels. There's definitely a lot of rise in terms of like technologies that actually drive a lot of convenience. Shorter path to purchase, especially for the consumers during the time, especially when we are all stuck at home. And in Malaysia, the lockdown doesn't seem to have ended. And because of that, there's definitely a lot of shift in terms of the way that we think, where consumer used to be and how they used to behave. A lot of test and learn, and therefore a lot of change in how we prioritize our investment in different channels.
Thank you. Excellent. Yuan?
Well, so much change, right? And I think it's continuously happening. We don't really know what's next now. We don't really know if people are totally back shopping where. We don't really know their preferences online when they purchase. So the 2 years that we've had that window for, we kind of did not have enough time, despite it being 2 years, to really make sure that we also study the other factors. Will they stay? Will they leave? Where will they do? What will they do next? So those were the stuff that I regretted not doing enough of, actually. We were just really at that point where we were doing the lockdown, we just also consume with, make sure we're there, wherever that is, wherever they are, we must be there. And then we stopped thinking about when they're there, what else are we doing right? What are they asking for? What were they looking? How do we upgrade this? So we were not doing that enough. So on hindsight, I wish I've done a little bit more on that, actually.
Okay. Interesting. Not many people have got many regrets from this last 2 years, I'm sure. Deryk?
My name is Deryk. Qoni is a corporate travel booking tool. Well, when we talk about travel, obviously the last 2 years has been interesting. Yeah, and impossible.
It has been impossible. You can't travel at all. But okay.
We just couldn't travel at all. So basically, you can say Qoni was born pandemic baby, you know. So basically, I guess in terms of the different channels that we have, in terms of all the different channels that we have, I think we look at travel now. Definitely, you look at the social commerce platform as being one of the key, marketing platforms that we have, and basically Qoni focuses on that.
Okay.
Basically from there.
Cool. Social commerce, it's the future, right? And along with live streaming, everything we're going through. And Sue-Ann?
Yeah, hi. I'm Sue-Ann from Trapper. I think the last 2 years obviously has been very challenging because whatever that affects our clients, it affects the agencies as well. I think I joined Trapper in the middle of the pandemic as well in January 2021, and the first day I went to the office, like 2 weeks later, it was locked down, and like I don't even remember like who's in my team and who's who. So we had to really be more agile. So I think the first thing that we did was to really maintain business continuity for clients, because their access to customers were obviously disrupted. So we have to think of ways to help the client to get back to the client's mindset. And the other thing is also, there are a lot of esteemed marketers here, so we know that we have to plan campaigns like way in advance, right? So there is also the question of booking. How do we, create agile plans for clients so that, one day it's MCO, next day it's not MCO. And we need to really follow the customer's path, right? So that's been really challenging, but I think the team, thank God, Trapper is quite a nimble and small team, so we were able to respond very well to that.
Excellent, and that's a really interesting segue. I'm going to come straight back to you with the next question. I talked earlier on about there being a proliferation right now of touch points, so many different ways that brands can communicate with us, but also that we can buy and interact with brands. In your sort of role where you're looking at the media planning, how do you help brands, or how do you see brands sort of selecting, prioritizing touch points and channels where they need to focus?
Right. So my background is in strategy. So I put the customer as the number one priority in planning. So I think looking back at the customer and deriving the data to inform the touch points, to me is the most important thing. Of course, there are existing platforms that we access to plan the journey for whatever segments that we're trying to target, right? But sometimes these data platforms may not provide micro level sort of view, especially when it comes to digital. But what we want to do is to make sure that we're always looking at the customer's touch point, data from the customer's touch point. We're also looking at obviously the client's campaign intention. So not like all campaigns would use or view the touch points in the same way. So we recommend basically this integration of different touch points to our clients based on those data that we access. And it's based on the segments that we derive.
Okay, so it's not a simple, easy thing to do at all, right?
I mean, the thing is, we can, like, they're not, to be honest, like in Malaysia, there are not a lot of like media channels, right? So it will be TV, radio, out of home, digital and all. But I think the difference is really understanding the experience have changed. And different segments access different touch points for different reasons. So I feel like the role of media is really important, and it has to be defined. Each of the channel, it has to be defined what is their role in that specific campaign. And then the other question is, how much do we invest in each one of them, right, to make sense of it? So I think we are, like, from Trapper's point of view, like, or at least from myself, like, I'm really big on integration. Yes, of course, during the pandemic, like, digital was like one of the key channels. But TV also saw a huge growth, right, in viewership. Like, it was the return of TV. Like, and I think, like, the important thing is I will always circle back, right, to the client's objective. What is it that they want to achieve? How would that define growth for them? And then we look at the various touch points that are relevant to the customer or the consumers, and design a plan based on that.
Sorry,
So I
just
was
to
gonna
add
come
on
to
a
you.
little bit. I think the medium has always been there. It's the intensity on how we use the different medium probably has changed, because the consumptions or the needs when they consume the media, or the time, the length of when they consume the media has changed. But definitely on content perspective has changed. And sometimes in the past, we sometimes look at, for example, TV, it's a rich medium. But today, you don't look at it as a rich medium. You start to innovate not on tools or platform, but you start innovating on how you use the media, and you might not use it very traditionally, because the length of time when you said that the TV came back, so it's not just like running sports, right? So you start doing a lot more engagement, content. There's a lot of also digitalizations on TV platform itself that allows a more two-way interaction. So I think that's what has excited a lot of, like, at least within ourselves, the accessibility to not just have a one-way conversations, but two-way conversations with our consumers.
Which is my complaint about television that has returned. So the as much as you drive engagement, and as much as you drive or you want it to be two ways, there are really a lot of limitation with still what you can do via a TV. You watch something, you want to buy that shirt. I like that shirt that she's wearing. How do you do it? You no, yeah, correct. So if there are like 5 of us, and then you have to put 5 scans, your QR over there, and then you. But it's not, because now we're sitting like this in a drama, for example. She moves really quickly. You don't even have time to showcase her baju to really talk about stuff. So the limitation is still. We've talked about this, TV becoming a mode or a platform that can enable actions for a long time.
But
It hasn't happened. It still hasn't happened.
Maybe it's of enabling interest, but then because it's multi-channel, right? And that's the subject. Because when I watch TV, I might not necessarily be on one screen. So I might be on multiple screens. It can be pushed on mobile, which drive more interactions and engagement, or it triggers some form of interest. I know that I've not tried the QR code yet.
Very interesting.
But generally, if you ask me, is there any big change in terms of like TV, radio? Okay, we just read newspaper just now. That was quite
Quite an experience.
Quite an experience. But all of this has been around. It's just how we utilize that, and the framing on us thinking differently has definitely been encouraged the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think I do totally agree. I feel like these channels, like I said, they are limited channels anyway, right? It's the how we use it that gives it a different dimension, or the innovation. But I think a lot of times now, like a lot of people are thinking, how do they enrich the traditional medium with a digital experience? So for example, like we do have technology and we have kind of sold campaigns to clients where we can hijack competitive ads, right? When they're watching TV, it's really the second screen nature. So if they're watching TV and you see a particular brand on TV, we hijack the second screen with our competitor brand. So I think these kind of thinking, like we have to think, like I said, the touch points are already there. Out of home, it's there, right? Digital out of home, it's there. But how do we utilize it to create impact or whatever engagement that we want? I think like that's what drives like creativity in this business. Mm.
Do you have anything to add, Deryk?
Well, I think for
That's a really fascinating
I think for Qoni, I think the difference between the last 2 years is because we are an online corporate booking tool. So obviously, our audience would have to be digitally savvy firstly, right? Yeah. So well, the advantage of the last 2 years is I think everybody's become digitally savvy if they were not, right? So I think that kind of helps. That kind of helps the process of basically, helps Qoni in a sense in pushing the product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've all suddenly seen the re-emergence of the QR code. Suddenly, it's the most amazing wow technology. I think this is a really interesting conversation, actually, and I think it's been quite interesting to listen about TV, because I'd never really thought about TV being sort of a two-way thing, but you're absolutely right. You watch something and then it's really frustrating when you're trying to find it online and you can't find it online, and it actually causes more anger and frustration. So it's really quite interesting. So I want to sway the conversation a little bit into this whole proliferation of e-commerce, buying online, Grab, deliveries, not just Grab, Foodpanda, any of the others that exist out there. All of these parties that we can now use to deliver products to us. I am very conscious about when I order something online now, the packaging that it arrives in is quite often heavy plastic. And we were just talking before about Malaysia had this big idea to remove single-use plastic, and then the pandemic hit, and suddenly we are plastic heavy again. I'm just curious. I'm going to start with you, Meng, as well. Is just to understand from a brand perspective, if people are buying you online, this whole sustainability sort of initiative that you might have internally, and whether or not it tallies with what's happening in the e-commerce, quick commerce, delivery world.
Well, on the context for corporate perspective, there's definitely planned, and we are aware that consumers are more discerning in terms of choices of brand that they want to stick to and choices of brand that actually they resonate. And the two part of it is really on how authentic the brand appears to be or is actually is. Mm-hmm. And that is what you've touched on sustainability and also on transparency, actually. So in a lot of times, especially when it comes to like shorter path of purchase, where it's e-commerce, where you have like live streaming, and essentially consumers are being bombarded with informations and a lot of, I wouldn't call it noise, but really like testimonials and word of mouth, and might not even be from your friends. Sustainability on our context perspective come from product, and that's much bigger. It's not, and I can only speak for a local perspective. That's something that we are behind our corporate, but definitely every affiliate or local company on our own, we drive transparency. So we've introduced technologies where allow the consumers to actually check authentications on exactly when the product comes in, where the product comes in, and how long the product has been in Malaysia, and then authentication and certifications of the made of the product, mm-hmm. and allowing them to accessibility to how the product is actually made. So that we provide, because you are talking about nutrition, and nutrition today is a big, big topic. And because of that, there's just so many products that's nutrition heavy being launched in the market, and you're essentially not sure what you are really putting into your mouth. So that we championed in at least Malaysia. we're really, really big on transparency. And especially we do that on digital platforms and we do that on e-commerce. And we try to leverage platforms in which they spend time and we make it easy for consumers to actually do that. So every of our pack, like you said, QR code now is so big thanks to my Sajatra, has a QR code which allows that kind of product authentications. And on top of that, allows an engagement for them to want to know more if they buy the products. Yeah.
Ewan?
Well, for me, I just want to pick on the word packaging, which is like a big deal, right? When we receive, we're so excited buying something online, and then when we receive, it comes in this huge, gigantic package. And there was a point where at Eon, we were having this huge conversation about how do we lessen the packaging, or how do we even become a little bit more responsible when it comes to packaging. But the question remains, right? It is really at the end of the day about functionality. We're not just delivering one package. We're talking about, say, in a day, thousands of packaging requests coming in. And then when we pack them, we have to consider leakages. We have to consider if the items don't work with each other very well. How do we contain the mess that it could create? How do we make sure that experience for the customers when they do open it, what is their experience? So we went from all kinds of material we were using, and we finally settled on what we think is a good enough answer for the customers at the moment, which is we recycle a lot of boxes. We just need to make sure that they're clean again, that they are relatively clean boxes. And then we put in all the items, and we try to make it as different as if they're fresh, wet items versus when they're dry items, for example. And we try to handle it as good as we can when we drop it at the homes. The wet one, where, if it rains, can you pick it up in time? We have all those concerns on behalf of the customers as well. So it is not as easy, or perhaps even as simple that it is to say that, there's also the re-emergence of plastics, right? It is still, to date, unfortunately, one of the most durable. We cut down all our plastics in the stores at the moment are all they turn into compost within like a month if you don't touch or use them. They just the burai into and so you are reminded again to use it as often as you can. But if you were to put like whatever products and you just store it for more than a month, those items that you thought you bagged away have no more bag in like a month or so. So it also depends on consumers' point of view and consumers' use for packaging. In Eon, we're very particular about how suppliers are sending their products to us and how we then display them and what is left behind and the customer's relationship with the packaging. There is going to be a relationship. There are, of course, the ones who are very clear about zero waste, right? They bring their own containers. They are very specific about no bags. They're very specific, no stickers. They're very specific about a lot of things like my vegetables, please do not have any plastic. Please do not have any stickers around it, etc., etc., because they don't want to throw anything away. But for many other customers, you will see that they will just take the whole roll of bags, which is because they really find it useful. It's really functional for them. So for us, if they functionally understand how to use it and keep using it and using it again and make use of the purpose of what the packaging are used for, in the long term, perhaps actually save well too. So those are actually the conversations that we constantly have internally, and we push suppliers to to make sure that they must not. Is there any way we can lessen the packaging? Is there any way that the consumers can return, the tin packagings to you? Can you give them incentives when they do return it? Are there a space where we can say that, hey, come over and you could do this with whatever packaging that you've had that you didn't like or that you felt was a waste of? Feedback. Give us feedback on how to do it better. What didn't you like about this plastic? Was it too much of a waste for you, and how do you perceive that bit? How is that a waste? Because wastefulness is actually quite different from person to person. And where do you prioritize wastefulness versus functionality? So that question is also important, because at the end of the day, what we do is to serve needs. And well, there are all kinds of needs.
And like
safe to say.
locally, we encourage the scoops to be returned, and we actually reward the consumers every time they return the scoops, so that we can, drive sustainability. But in your context, I feel like as I'm listening, especially for a retail group, right, it gets so difficult to balance. It gets very complicated, right, to balance between like quality when you deliver to the consumers to like, when it arrives to like, lesser and more sustainable way of packing. Like I feel like it can be quite a complicated decisions. Like if it comes with lesser, probably some consumers like, you are not giving me great packaging.
So we actually have a comment box. So in the comment box, in the remark box, for the customers to actually be very clear about how they like it delivered. So you can be very specific and say, please do not send me any plastics. Please make sure your packaging is minimal. Please make sure they're all boxed. And I will pass my bags to the rider, and please find a way to get the bags off the rider, because I will be doing this and that. So, but this again requires some form of actions from the customers as well. We will make that kind of allowances to personalize, and we want to do more and more of that. But it does require a lot of coordination between all the parties that are involved.
Absolutely. And as much as I think I could talk about sustainability and plastics and the world, we're here to talk about omnichannel marketing greatness. So we will come back to omnichannel. And I really want to ask sort of Deryk and Sue-Ann about this emerging digital touch points and channels that we're seeing with social commerce, with live streaming, v-commerce, and the potential futures we might have with multiple realities, all that kind of stuff as well. I was just wondering, starting with Sue-Ann, how you're seeing this growth and how you're seeing brands interact with all of these different sort of digital channels, because it's not just digital anymore, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously any channel that brings sales for the client is a good channel. So we don't discriminate like whichever channel. But I think again, we shouldn't look at sales channel or e-commerce. Like I think the idea of digital is it's dynamic. It's always evolving. So what we understand today as e-commerce is probably changing as we speak, right? So then you have the emergence of like live selling on Facebook, on probably TikTok, and the thing is, it would be good like for us to view it differently, right? Like what's the role of that particular channel in sales? Because the way or what the customer is experiencing, going to Lazada to purchase the product and discovering the product in say TikTok is completely different. So we find that in social commerce, that's a lot of discovery. So, I mean, there are two sides to the coin. So the argument the social platforms are making is, oh, you don't need to do advertising anymore. You don't need to do branding because customers are discovering your products online on social media. But I do think there's some truth to that, because especially for low involvement products, and you see something online, you don't even care what brand it is, right? You just, oh my god, it's so cute, I want to get it, so you just click. But when it comes to like higher involvement type of product, when it involves your kid, your kid's nutrition, when it involves like your own safety, a car, for example, like I think digital plays a huge role, but it is still at the end of the day, a lot of consideration, research, and everything has to come to place. It's not as quick as low involvement products. So I think using social commerce, live commerce in ways that is relevant for that said product in launch, I think that's like the most important thing. A lot of brands are using or experimenting with these new channels, like more like a marketing tactic to gain awareness, to gain like talkability. But then the trick is, okay, do we evaluate it and then do we make that a sustainable channel for us? Like, would it stay or would it move on to something else? So I think it is like what you said, is a super important consideration, all of these like digital channels. But I think again, I'll circle back to the role of the channel. Like, what is it used for? In which part of the customer journey? I think that's like the most important thing to consider.
So the most important thing is to understand the person doing the journey and what they're using it for.
Yes, absolutely. So I think there's this Facebook group called Malaysia Picky. Not sure if you guys know or heard of it. It basically reviews like stuff from Lazada and Shopee, like things that, like weird things from China
That should
that
be
you're not
entertaining.
I
sure.
was going to say, I'm going to
Yeah,
go
like you're
seek
not
this
sure,
one
like,
out.
does it really work? But they would review it, they will put a video online. So even though even though it's online, like it's on Facebook, like you can't click immediately to purchase. But I feel like that's telling you something, right? Because it created that intent, that interest. So if like there is a way for customers to immediately click purchase, and I think then we're looking at a very different shopping behavior. The most the highest traffic of all these online shopping is really at night, when the mom nothing to do on the bed and waiting to fall asleep, and and they'll leave a lot of things in the cart. Not everything gets purchased. It's just it's just a psychological thing. Like they just
Window shopping.
Yeah, I was about to say it's a different kind of
So
window
exactly,
shopping.
exactly. So people are the people's shopping behavior is changing drastically, and we have to figure like how do we catch up with that.
Yeah, which is the OMG part, to be honest.
Yeah,
I always thought like,
exactly.
oh, this is changing. OMG is changing. Okay, fine.
Well, Deryk, if you have anything.
I think I agree with what Suen said. I think for travel, I think obviously the last 2 years impossible to travel, so we've seen a lot of obviously live streaming and a lot of social commerce and all these things. So social media has actually really helped the travel industry in that sense. One of the main things social media has done, I mean, because the 2 years of not being able to travel, you tend to sell the dream of traveling, And then I also had this conversation with Suen earlier. I think knowledge in terms of the difference between looking at a post somewhere on social media, you know what I mean, in terms of a very beautiful place, a bit of description, gives people the idea, sells them the dream of traveling. That's where I want to go to, rather you also have you have a list, a bucket list or something, top 10 bucket list or something. People tend to dream of traveling that sense. So social media definitely is a place. Then live streaming, we do see a lot of travel agencies, or I guess people trying to sell travel on these things. I think currently the hot thing is having KOLs. You see a lot of travel agents using a lot of KOLs, and they are traveling in Europe, and they're selling, and it's working. So I mean, like what she said, any channel that sells, any channel, any whatever medium you're using, and then you can sell something, then you do have to evaluate where it's coming from. But can it sustain? That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think that's the...
I just want to add a little bit, right? So on one hand, we talk about the customers being the core, the most important. The customer is who we are serving at the end of the day. So the journey is very important. The way he lives, not how we live, because otherwise we are talking at them instead of with them. But what's also really important is the content creation bit, the content creation side, which is very similar to what you're saying about how you use the platforms. But over here, we're talking about how what are you actually putting on the platform? So ideally, of course, the platform itself is able to close the loop off. If I'm really interested to buy or do something about this, I can. So the platform must enable that already to have all kinds of functions, all kinds of actions allowed. I think that's the minimum expectation. And then after is how we then want to talk about what we're trying to tell you. Are we trying to pique your interest? No selling here, but just to interest you. But if you're interested, you can try it. Just click and you can have it in your house just to try it, just to pilot, for example. But those things are important, and I think the measurement that we should be talking about today, of course, you talk about spend, but it does not need. For me, marketing today, especially in an omni-channel space, is not just about measuring the results, and the results not just about sales. It's also not just about subscription number or also the number of likes. Who cares to like something, right? I prefer not to like something actually. I just want to scroll, but I do stop and look at it. So it is clearly important for a lot more marketeers to really think about the different kind of stuff that the customer would like to be exposed to. Not so much your item fitting into their lives, but their lives, and then how your item is adding value. So the add value bit is very important.
And I do like what Suen say about categorizing the low involvement brand versus high involvement brand. So it's very important to know what your brand add values to the shopper or consumers that you are talking to. So like, for example, in nutrition per se, we use live streaming not so much as to promote or anything, but really to drive educations, because during this time, there are a lot of questions on how to keep healthy, what is this ingredient for, and what are the things that I need to look out for. And really bringing closer, like, for example, there were times where you were afraid of going hospitals or clinics. Like, can we actually provide that service by bringing our partners closer to the consumers who actually have questions and have that interactions? So essentially, it's really about like whatever that you want to do on social commerce, because it's so quick and it's so accessible. We gotta be very responsible and understand our roles on exactly what we are trying to deliver to the consumers, especially on high involvement brands.
So you're both, all of you, reading my minds, and I've got two follow-up questions that tie into what's been said, and I'm trying to decide which one's going to be OMG. So let's come to the very simple, straightforward question, which is, how do we measure ROI in this world, right? Just because you've bought something on Lazada doesn't mean that that's where you found it, the ROI for Lazada versus the brand that you bought. How do you measure ROI on the investments that you're making when it comes to marketing? Suan?
Sure. So I think there are two ways that we do in Trapper. One, obviously, if it's a 100% digital attribution, like that's quite easy. We kind of know like which are the channels that are really working for certain campaigns or certain products. But I would also like advise clients to do like a full marketing attribution study to understand, because sometimes it's not just the media that we are investing in, right? It could be like a sales promo, it could be like some dealer incentive or whatever that's in the marketing mix. So we would actually advise clients to do like a thorough study on marketing attribution, so that we understand all of the channels and how each of the channel is actually contributing to the ROI, whatever the end metric matters to the client. Usually it's sales, right? And I think that is really important, because I feel like marketing is always evolving, right? It's dynamic. We have to try something to understand whether it works or it doesn't. So in what we normally do with our clients is we do recommend them like a balanced ratio of investing in something that works. So some clients are always gunning for innovation, and they forget that sometimes when something works, like, don't change it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yes, exactly. So we would actually like recommend like, okay, certain part of the budget, like it has to be invested back in what works. And then this is the now channels that worked for us. And then we invest in what's next, what's new, something that maybe competitors are on and we're not on, and then we would be on it. And then what's next? Meaning you are the innovator. You create like new channels for yourself to reach your customers. So I think we with that kind of like investment, like we have to track like what's working for us, like, you know, currently I think there isn't you know, this one size fit all kind of like solution, I feel. So it really depends on the client's appetite as well, whether they want to invest in this kind of projects. Yeah, but I feel like information, like having that data really kind of gives you a lot more confidence to move forward with what channels actually worked when, why. That's the most important thing.
And I want to ask you the same question, Meng, as from the sort of brand position. Like, how do you measure ROI or think
Well,
about?
first of all, it's not as complex as we think, right? If we really think about like what exactly is the stage of the brand, what are we trying to do? So if you're launching a new brand, then essentially you've got to look into KPI from brand perspective first. Because then you know the objective is really to drive awareness and really to drive considerations as the core priorities. And then it goes down to media and touch points, right? So when you go through the funnels, it is not as linear, but at least as a guideline, we know that awareness, you measure the CPM and then the reach and considerations, the clicks, and then trial, it's the leads, for example, cost per leads. And then you kind of do optimizations. But I do agree that at the end of it, we do marketing attributions really to see exactly what works and what didn't work. And especially during these 2 years, there's a lot of test and try on how you actually execute. You might be doing exactly the same thing. You intensify some of the touch points and you kind of change the content. But has it worked to what you think based on the data that you have? Then you do a marketing attributions to actually see the ROI. And then do you have like brand health, which you talks about like what is the equity that you're trying to say. Then you measure whether you are actually saying the right thing. And then is the awareness or the trial or the considerations drivers exactly what you have done. So there are so many data and enablers out there to allow us to actually see the measurements. But one of the big things and I would say in marketing is that there's just so many. And sometimes we complicate matters. Essentially is really make sure that you know exactly what you're trying to do. I've been on both sides, agency and client, in which sometimes they get very frustrated to actually receive a brief they're trying to find, like to try to achieve 10 objectives.
I know that feeling as well.
and then you end up having 100 measurements of how you perceive works and do not work. So have a clue on exactly what you're trying to achieve and really set the target. And there is no one way of measure. There are media measurements, there's brand measurements, there's penetration measurements, and there's like, and be very clear on what we're trying to do.
Yeah, like just to add on, right? Like, it seems like, you know, like big data is a big word, data driven is a big word. And then, so I had conversations with clients and then they tell me, I want to like really personalize like my messaging and experience to specific customers. So sometimes we have to take a step back, right, and think, okay, is that efficient? Or okay, fine, like you want to have some kind of data or information, but I think what's important, and probably you might agree, because in research, like we always ask, right, what do you want to action? What do you want to action on that piece of information that you get? Because if you were to invest and get that information, and actually you realize like, it doesn't really change my plan, right? So it's just really like good to have, but it doesn't rock your world, right? Like, so I feel like it's also a question of not being, you know, overtly, with every single data point, like, but get the ones that are critical, that would inform the business and that you can actually action on it.
Like the one that actually so what to the business, you know, like, okay, what does it do to the business? I think that's it.
But also, aside from the so what question, for ROI questions, I also think it's very important for the clients to understand, to also not be afraid to really not be afraid. And I think the agency also need to, drive this a little bit harder to the clients that they shouldn't be afraid of what is customarily or traditionally perhaps be known as a bad result. Like if you do something and they don't buy, okay, it's not a bad thing. You have to look at what worked. Sure, there are things that you hope will work but didn't work. But what then worked? Something must click. Something must have happened to make certain things work. So what is it? So in our search for ROI that's very absolute, like we sold something, we turned something, we converted something, we also mustn't forget that there are things that we aren't looking for, but are just staring at us in the face because we aren't looking for it, and then we don't see it. And it's such a pity. So for me, it's never about just a sale. It's always about, for me, the end is always about, can I get the customer to give me feedbacks? Can I have the customer to say something to me? That's it. That's all I want. Just say. Even if it's a hi, it's great. Because now, I moved you to say hi. So now what next? So then the ball is back in my court. But if the ball is constantly just being, played out and I'm like, okay, where is the return? Where is the return? And if it's flying over our head and we're not saying that as a return, it has to come to the net or to the bat that I'm holding, then it's just such a pity because we're not seeing more of what we should.
And also to your point of ROI, one very simple mistake sometimes we do is that we report it, but we don't know whether if it's a good number or a bad number because you don't have benchmark, right? We said like, oh, it's 3 times more.
Or good enough, right? Should it be 300 times?
3.0 good or 1.0 good or is it 2.0 good? I think sometimes we get so excited over data and then we are like mining data and then we find different ways to triangulate what could have been successful. But benchmark against what? What does that mean? What does that number mean? I think that's a very common mistake that even myself or my team does.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I had this experience, this incident with like a colleague, and they were showing like, oh, wow, look at our achievement, like our digital achievement,
1 million,
like 6 million impressions as opposed to target 1 million. And I go like, I don't need 6 million. I only need 1 million. Does that mean I cut the budget? Because I just need 1 million. I don't need 6 million. What does 6 million mean?
Over budget.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry, Deryk, yes.
I guess for a tech startup, a travel tech startup like us, I think our ROI is, take up. We measure it obviously by take up.
Yeah.
But of all this talk about data, I think, but with us, I think how we cut that data is always very important. How you use that data, what sort of data do you have? Everybody says big data, but what do they do with it? But with our data, because it's very specific, we're always able to negotiate better deals and across the board. It can be targeted towards clients, per se, that sort of way, So in that sense, when you can give more value to your clients, you can also push up your take up. It's just that's how we measure it as a tech startup now.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting point. I'm going to move on, but I just want to, my personal opinion is quite often on big data, we hear clients, and I hear clients all the time, and we own so much data, we've got so much data, but what do you do with it? And actually, what does it tell you? It tells you that so-and-so bought something from your site and they are 35 years old and they're a woman, and you can assume they've got a child. What do you actually do with that information? Like, it's just a bunch of dots and dashes at the end of the day, and it's very difficult to know what to do with it. So I think one of the common themes I'm hearing here is that we're all people at the end of the day, right? We're all absorbing media in the same way. We're all absorbing brands in the same way and finding out in the same way. They can't be brought down to dots and dashes in a big database of what we do. But I do want to move forward, and I really want to come and talk to you, Yuan, because you're coming from a physical retail environment. So we talk a lot about social, digital, and everything like this. I'm really curious on your perspective on how the physical retail world has changed and what you think of as the future for physical retail.
Well, you're not going to hear from me that
Okay,
physical
I won't
is
hear
going
from
out of
Absolutely,
business.
no, it's definitely not.
It's definitely staying in business. And I think given how much more people want to touch things and feel things and trust things, they do want to see it, we will be more and more relevant. But we must also clearly be present everywhere else. And for me, the ideal omnichannel is really how are we making sure that the customers feel like it's in the same space, regardless of whether they're coming to us physically or whether they are online buying from us, that they feel like we're the same people selling. We're still, if their idea of us are smiling people, which I hope, and therefore, do they feel like we're smiling people across all the other touch points that they see us at, whether it is on Facebook, or do they see us as the same or not, based on their experience? So clearly, because you have your feed will be very different, right? And then suddenly when Eon comes out, does it feel like you still understand this Eon? So that is really difficult at the moment because we are serving so many personas, so many different kind of segments and so many different types. So that actually got us scratching everywhere, trying to figure out how else can we serve ourselves in various different journey, because it's so different. And the personalization for us is maybe 100 times more difficult compared to, let's say, if you're a singular brand trying to sell off certain specific items online or in business, a shop, for example. But because we're a general merchandise store, so that means we are generally serving a lot more general stuff to a lot more people. So how do they relate to us amidst all this conversation and personalization? I mean, that's the most difficult thing to talk about.
I mean, I'm going to throw a question out there. How important do you really think personalization is when you're talking to your consumers?
I think for general merchandise store, just saying that I think they only want personalization when they ask for it.
Right.
Very specific when they ask for it.
Oh, you get really freaky, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
Why
how
are you
do know my
talking to me?
name?
Don't talk to me. But otherwise, I think they like their own space. They do want. So then the idea here is to always present them with ways that they can. It's up to you if you want to have a look at it or not. But then again, it's also really strange that on the sales floor, we do find a lot more sales for items where there's real active promoters that are in sync with their lifestyle, pushing them things. So if you're a mature if you're a mature shopper, for example, and you speak to another mature promoter, for example, you're going to have this conversation that you are like that person. And that's important. Yeah. So how do we promote more of this in a general merchandise store? So that's something that is difficult, especially on social media.
I like to think of the term brand hospitality. I feel like it's more about, Japan does it fantastically, right? And they don't go to the name level type of personalization, but they really make you feel special as a customer. So I feel like it is really about understanding the different channels and to be able to deliver the brand hospitality specifically for that channel. So I had a question all this while, why would a cosmetic e-commerce site list the products how Village Grocer would list groceries?
Oh, yeah. What word? What?
Yeah. So you get me, that experience. If you think about it from a hospitality point of view, what you're trying to sell and what the customer wants. The customer wants to see how the color would look like on her face. So if it was AR enabled, she can actually see how it looks on her face. You don't need to do that with vegetables, right? It's very simple. Just click and yeah. So I think
it's availability of tag, though, right? The tag is just not available yet. I'm sure if it's available, people will do that already.
It
but
is.
just not.
It is.
Top model
Yeah.
face.
Sure. Right now it is, but when they first started, when you first sell cosmetic, it's not. So you
Yeah.
just kind of list it. And how do you buy cosmetic anyway? You already know what you're going to buy, and then you just go there and buy it. So list it for me. Simple, easy, like how I would shop for grocery, and voila, I just pick what I already know. I'm not trying something new. I'm not going to try on something that I already know. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
So
I
there's
think-
that different functions,
Yeah.
different people,
Yeah.
different needs, different cycle, different journey that would
Yeah.
really be.
For sure.
I like brand hospitality, and I absolutely agree. It's really not just about personalizations, right? It is about the experience that you take home and what the brand can offer.
Yeah.
So having a name there is nice, but if you're going to be rude all the way and not manage expectations or not meet expectations of what I want from a skincare or cosmetic or nutrition or in a retail outlet, I think that will ruin it. So brand hospitality has really nailed it for me. To an extent, I'm a big believer that you will never replace actual touch sensorial experience. Because retail outlets are not just a place where I go in, get out, and buy stuff, right? Retail outlets, and I'm helping out here, like Aeon. Like Aeon, it provides more than that, like family, a place to go, right? A family bonding and an environment where you can actually really feel and touch and leave home with an experience. So I'm a big believer that they complement each other. They are here to stay. One probably more intense than frequencies probably change, but I really don't think that in the near future that retail will leave.
Right.
Mm.
Yep, no, I completely agree with you. Deryk, anything to add on personalization? You have a.
It's all been said.
It's all been said.
No, but I do want to personalize something for you. You know, in my head, if you're corporate, right? Corporate traveling, right? So now that the market's open, we want to go to all kinds of fairs. Get us there.
It's not a problem. We can talk, you know. But it's all about. I mean, when it's brand hospitality, I think I think that you know, that relationship needs to be there. You know,
Yeah.
if once it's there, you see longevity in it. You know, and then there's also loyalty
Yeah.
in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. Well, I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to scrap my last two questions because otherwise they'll be shouting at me in the background. So I want to say thank you ever so much for the conversation that we've had today. I think we've covered a lot of topics, but it's been really interesting. It's been great to get your insights into everything. So thank you very much for coming along and having very different perspectives and points of view. Thank you very much.
No, thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.